Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Let me call this meeting of the Electoral Board to order. If you would all please rise for a moment of silence and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for finding us at our new venue. Sorry. The pre-processing is going on in the old courthouse next door where we normally meet, so they're actively processing mail-in ballots. So we're here just for today. So the first item of business is the organization of the Electoral Board. So we have a new member that has been just appointed by the Circuit Court, Marcus Moyer. And so the state code requires that the secretary and the chair be of opposing parties. So we need to decide what title Marcus will have. So does anyone have a motion?
I move that we accept Marcus as a vice chairman.
Okay, I'll second that. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay, welcome very much.
Thank you.
All right. So approval of the minutes. We don't have the minutes in front of us, and so we're going to table that until our next meeting. So we'll pass that by. Next is a report from Electoral Board members. London, do you have anything?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, since this is a new menu and I'm eating crow, because I was at the regular meeting place and the staff told me it was at the McCord Building, and I'm familiar with the McCord Building with the members of the Racial and Social Justice Committee, and then I couldn't find it there. I had to call Eric. Fortunately, I brought one of my cell phones. I left the other one at home. The Peter principal is hard at work here, but I'm Judge London Stevenson. I'm a retired federal administrative law judge, and I would just like to say briefly that two of the greatest duties of any citizen of America, one is to vote, and the other is to serve on a jury. So don't throw those jury summonses away when you get them. And a non-citizen has a duty not to get involved in the electoral process. Our governor has signed an executive order to that effect, and if you do, you run the risk of being not granted asylum, not being granted citizenship, and even prosecuted. We as American citizens and as the electoral officers here believe that voting should be easy and that cheating should be hard, if not impossible. It breaks my heart to think of the people who have died, been murdered, even lynched to secure the right to vote. People like James Chaney, Andy Goodman, Mickey Swerner, Viola Isa, many others. This year the turnout has been astronomical. This is probably the greatest turnout of any election in my lifetime, and also especially as a member of the Electoral Board, we got our work cut out for us, because some people out there like Stalin say it's not how many people vote, it's who counts the votes. Exactly. So instead of having an election day, we have an election season, so they can count and keep counting until they get as many as they want. There is a, whether you know it or not, there's a government in heaven. Did you know that? One day, I hope to be either elected to or appointed to a position in that government. Christians have a duty to vote. And we as Americans are unique in the world. We govern ourselves. We don't have a king or a pope. This is an experiment, and in order for this experiment to succeed and to continue, everyone must exercise their franchise so that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall endure. So I'm happy with the turnout. I'm happy that this is, I think we've got over 50,000 votes cast so far.
It's past 60,000 now.
60,000. God, I stopped counting 10,000 ago. But this is a historic election. And so I'm proud to be a member of the process, even if we have to work 24/7 to count those absentee ballots. And the staff at the election office have been working overtime. I've been observing them off and on, ad hoc, just looking in on them. And they're doing a great job. And you people don't realize how lucky you are, how lucky we are to have Eric as our general registrar, because I have seen other precincts. I've heard of a precinct which said they will not certify the election. This election, they've already said they won't certify it. There are election general registrars who, I don't know, they're marching to the beat of their own drum. But we have a good general registrar, and we have rewarded him in his evaluation. We give credit where credit is due. So thank you, Eric, and thank you to staff, even though they had to tell me at the last minute that the meeting was moved to the McCourt building. I didn't realize this was part of the McCourt building. This is the executive office building, is it?
It's like a development services building.
Okay, so
Planning, zoning, that kind of thing.
finally we have a quorum.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody who came and everybody who managed to transfer that maze and get here before me. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to welcome Marcus. I've seen his paperwork. He's been writing left and right, and it's good to have you on board.
Thank you, sir.
You're replacing a good man, a lieutenant general in the Air Force, Mark Dillon. He served above and beyond the call of duty. We expect no less of you.
Amen.
That's all I have.
All right. Marcus, you want to introduce yourself or any other comments?
Sure. Thank you. So, yes, my predecessor was a lieutenant general in the Air Force. I retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, which is the same.
Oh! Oh!
You know,
We like to think so,
we're
too.
on the record here.
I do. Yeah,
That might be considered slander.
it's actually a compliment to the Air Force.
Oh! Simplify.
Hoorah. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and an immense honor for me to be here and to have the opportunity to serve you all and the other people in Prince William County in this role. I would like to take a minute to thank my predecessor, Mark Dillon, for his service and the good work that he did while in this seat. And I look forward to picking up where he left off. I do believe in the fundamental principles that are laid down in our founding documents. I believe the sole purpose of government is to secure the rights of the people, and that legitimate governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. And elections are how we accomplish those things. And what could be more important than that? As London just said, Abraham Lincoln famously said that it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But more accurately, it is a government of the people who show up. And that's why it's important to vote.
Amen.
I will echo what both of my colleagues have said in the past, that it is our goal that it should be easy to vote and very hard, if not impossible, to cheat, ensuring fair, open, and accurate elections and protecting the voting rights of all citizens. It is an honor for me to be here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, welcome to Marcus. So I will just echo their comments about how important this election is. You know, we come from different political backgrounds, but you know, we all agree that fundamentally, you know, it's the American people decide, and it's our job not to make the law, or our job is to make sure that the votes are cast and counted accurately in a transparent way, and that we certify the results to the Department of Elections. We've done that every year since I've been on the board, and we've done it every year up until this year. But this presidential years bring out the you know, some of the best and the worst in people around the country. But we are committed, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the agenda, to carrying out our legal responsibilities to certify the election. So next item of business is the General Registrar's report.
All right, so I'm going to touch on several different things. I'm going to talk today about our election progress. I'm going to talk about some of the concerns that we've seen when the board members are talking about being easy to vote and hard to cheat. We're going to talk about the ways that we've made it easy to vote and the ways that we've made it hard to cheat, and all the things that we do to make sure that we have fair, accurate, and transparent elections. What that looks like, what some specifics are, some things that we've been, handling for this election in particular, and a few things for the future of interest as well. So, I barely had to change this slide. So, election progress, we've completed 195 of 200 tasks. I just had to change the decimal point from 97.4 to 97.5. So we're keeping right on pace with where we should be. A couple tasks that are a little behind, but just like the last time, we also had 15 future tasks that have already been completed. So we have a little bit more ahead of the deadline than we have that are behind the deadline. So that's always a good sign for me. And our team has been doing an excellent job. As someone who's worked in elections for 14 years, you sit there when you're at another organization, you say how you might do things differently if you were in charge. Well, I am in charge of the staff now, and I'm really pleased with kind of where we are in terms of our progress, in terms of the changes that we've made. We're going to talk about a bunch of those, and in terms of making this a process that, while staff certainly has to put in overtime, they're not killing themselves, they're not wearing themselves out. And that's really important as we come down the stretch and make sure that the staff still has some energy in them as we get towards the end. So things are overall going pretty smoothly. We're going to talk about a few issues later on, but early voting has been positive, smooth, safe. We do have police out there to monitor it. Some of them marked, some unmarked. Not every site every day, but since early voting is concentrated in such a small number of locations, we do want to have some people keeping eyes on it, so that's been good. Voters have been very collegial and polite overall. Sometimes when they come in their T-shirts of their chosen candidate, sometimes people make comments. I have not seen much of that at all, and we've had election officers that are doing their duty, observers watching that process, and I think overall it's gone very well so far. Pre-processing is caught up to the mail received, so as of yesterday, I think they had processed about 16,000 of the mail ballots that have come in. We just marked about 2,000 more that arrived at the start of the week here. So we have about 18,000 mail ballots returned, and they have caught up with almost all of those. So that's really good to making sure that gets timely completed as we head towards Election Day. We've completed all our logic and accuracy testing, in particular the scanners, also the ADA machines. But with the scanners, we tested more than 10,000 ballots on all of those ballot scanners this election, and they came out 100% accurate. So the scanners are, we've verified that those results are coming out exactly as they should, assuming people mark their ballot correctly, and don't go outside the box or something like that. So we've tested the results reporting system. So a number of localities did a sandbox run with the state to make sure the results reporting system is going to not have issues. The last couple general elections, there have been some hiccups in terms of some slowness of loading of results. It didn't affect us in the last November election, but we want to make sure that it doesn't. So the state has done some testing on that, so they think the statewide results reporting system is ready for this election.
Is there a uniform software program, or does every county set up their own way to report the results to elect?
No, it's all reported. When you go to the state website on election night, you're going to see a big link at the top of the page for election night results, and every county around the state, every city and county is reporting into that module. Now, how they do that might be a little different. In our precincts, we have officers that use a poll pad to submit the results to us, and then we post those on the website. Some counties, they might call their results in. Some counties, they wait till the officers come back to the office, and then they hand them a results sheet or something like that. So the process by getting those results back can vary, and especially when you're talking about counties that like ours that have 100 polling places versus maybe a county that's got 3 polling places. But once that data comes back, it is either uploaded through a data sheet or it's hand entered on election night into the system. And then that is all loaded in. So all those results are tallying for those state totals. for us on election night, we're probably going to see our absentee and our early voting be the first results that go in. Because we have a high-speed scanner now, we're able to consolidate the drives from all of those early voting machines, and we already have the absentee ballots all centralized on one computer. So usually by 8 o'clock or so, maybe even sooner, we'll have those early voting and absentee results in. And then as the precincts complete their results, depending on if they have lines at the end of the day, how quickly the officers there are able to report the results, you'll see those kind of trickle in, probably starting around 7:30, 7:40, and then continuing onward till 9 or 9:30 or so. We've had really positive feedback from the officers. I have to say a lot of voters have been very gracious. I think they know the pressure and the importance of this election, and I think they've been very appreciative towards our officers, and I've seen a lot of gracious thank yous of all of our officers. We have more than 1,000 out there on election day, and we have probably, I don't know what our total number is, close to 100 of them working at our early voting sites. And people have been very gracious towards them. They also really like the new stickers that we have now. They've been a lot of comments and positive comments about that. So in terms of complaints, it hasn't been much. In a presidential election, I actually expected more. I'm not asking for more, but we expect a lot. We log all of our calls in the office since the time that early voting started, and that amounts to about 2,400 calls that we've logged so far. We categorize them basically, are these just questions where a voter has a mail ballot and they have a question about how to send it back or to fill out the form? Is somebody calling about early voting, they just need to find out where an early voting location is? And then we have a complaints column where, concerns, that kind of thing, and those get kicked up to myself or one of the deputy directors to handle, to talk to that voter about that particular issue. Only 16 of those 2,400 have been in that complaint category, so that's a really great number, and I think it's great that we're tracking all this because it's going to enable us to know what are the questions that we're going to get in the future. How do we make sure we have answers for voters? Because for our people at our office, they've got some scripts for different things. We get so many questions so many times that we develop scripts for certain questions so that everybody's saying the exact same information to the voters and that there's no confusion about that. So not a ton of complaints so far. Early voting has been going really well. Last week we averaged more than 4,150 voters per day. We did not have much wait. We've increased the capacity to all of our sites. The DMV and Haymarket have 4 check-in stations. We reconfigured those sites to have more capacity, especially the DMV. We've been able to get as many as 1,600 voters through that little closet in a day, and we think we can get up to 2,000. So we've made it so those sites can move people through because we know those are the most popular sites. We are trying to let voters know through Twitter and through communicating with our supervisors and other people to let your voters know about Brentsville, the main office, Dumfries Community Center, Ferlazo. Those are all sites that are underused, and I think because in past ordinances, voters were going to different sites in different elections. You don't have any ability to build up consistency and routine then. So hopefully as we go in the future and have more sites open, voters will be going to those sites more because we can handle twice as many voters every single day as we've had at those sites so far. But I think the question has been asked of us, so what does this tell us? And we see media outlets all the time trying to make predictions about turnout and what does this mean, and there's more voters at Haymarket, there's more voters at the DMV, this means this party's doing well, we won't know until after election day. The highest turnout of the last 3 elections, the presidential elections we've had, was, let's see, I'm counting backwards now, 2016, 2012, and we did not have early voting, and we did not have absentee voting except if you had a specific reason. So that had the highest turnout in Prince William County and the state of the last 3, and you didn't have those options. So we don't know if a lot of people coming out to early voting just means we'll have an easier election day and we'll still have a lot of voters, or if less voters are excited about this election and it's going to be, turnout will be down a little bit. We won't know that till after election day. So I have counseled some of our media that has been asking questions about this, that it's really hard to tell, and especially when you're comparing turnout data to 2020, there was a pandemic going on. Mail voting was massive in that election, so a lot of differences. So you have to be careful about those, comparisons. In terms of what we can do is see how we're comparing to other counties. So if we look at similar sized counties, we see that Prince William, this is through Sunday, had more than 40,000 voters, early voters through Sunday. Chesterfield, Virginia Beach, and Loudoun, which are very similar size to us. We're a little larger, but they're in the same category. They're all about 26 or 27,000 voters. So I know we did see some criticism about the new ordinance and people weren't having an opportunity to, well, there's evidence right there that there's plenty of opportunities. Prince William has more site voting days than any of those counties. Only Fairfax, which is a much larger county than us and should have a lot more voting days, has more voting days. We also have Sunday voting and weekend voting and late night voting, and I don't think there's a county outside of us and Fairfax and maybe Arlington that kind of check all those boxes. So I think our voters have had ample opportunity to early vote. The statistics are showing that. When we look at we have to try to prognosticate turnout, and we knew that early voting was going to be a little bit down this election because no pandemic. We knew mail voting was going to be way down this election because no pandemic, and we're seeing that. We're looking right now at we had 110,000 early voters in 2020. We're probably looking at 100 or 105, somewhere in that for early voting for this election would be our guess at this point. Based on past turnout, which tends to really swell at the very end, last 3 or 4 days of early voting. Are you all hearing me okay, by the way? Normally I'm kind of facing you guys a little bit more, but the setup here, so okay. Mail voting, we had 60,000 mail voters in the 2020 election. We've only sent out a little over 35,000 mail ballots this election. So and some of those people go early votes. Not everyone votes even when they get a ballot sent to them. So we're probably looking at 25 to 30,000 mail ballots that'll be returned. In both of those cases, whatever we have so far, whether you're an early voter or a mail voter, the last 2 weeks are the busiest time. So we get more mail ballots towards the end than we do in the first couple weeks. Same thing with early voting. So looking at this per capita, Prince William County and early and mail voting combined is actually ahead of the average for Northern Virginia and slightly ahead of the average for the state overall. It's pretty impressive when mail voting is so far behind what it was. That means our early voting must be significantly above. And the data here comes from VPAP, because while I can get our statistics, I don't have access to, Loudoun or Northern Virginia statistics. But VPAP does a really great job. They pull the voter credit information and they post it online, so you can see how many voters are coming in each day. You can see what the averages are, how these compare, how it compares to past elections. So excellent data visualizations for anybody that's interested. They do all kinds of different stuff in elections and other government areas as well. So to summarize, despite less mail voting after the pandemic, our early voting expansion used data to really time the sweet spot of voter interest, and that's what we based our recommendations to the supervisors and the ordinance about. They took those recommendations, they passed that ordinance, and we're seeing that is really showing that we're getting good turnout for early voting in Prince William County. People are having good access to opportunities to vote. Using more early voting sites for longer and all the weekend options is keeping us ahead of the expected pace and also in comparison to other counties and localities. So to help with voters figuring out where to go, one thing we're working on right now, and I really give thanks to Natalia and Thalia on my staff. This is something we had when I was in DC, and in DC we have huge early voting centers and tons of people, and so we had a wait time tool there because it was really necessary. And this is not something that has really been necessary for non-presidential elections for us, but might be really useful this weekend and through next week. So we're going to add a wait time tool to our website where the early voting sites are going to report to us roughly what their wait is, 15 minutes, 30, no wait here. And we're going to put it on the website. So we're going to get that up in the next couple days here. We've been kind of beta testing it, getting the early voting site to practice kind of reporting that information. But thanks to Thalia and Natalia, who I was like, hey, we used to have this in DC. Fairfax has one. I would love to add this. Can you guys figure it out? It took an afternoon, I believe. I think by an afternoon they had an idea for it. They kind of figured out, yes, we could do it. And then they worked on it for the next couple of days to kind of to smooth it out a little bit. So it's really nice as a director to have a staff behind me that's so competent and professional and can provide additional services. So that'll be a nice tool, and voters will be able to go see. And what they're probably going to see is, wow, there's really a long line at the DMV on a Saturday, the last Saturday to vote. Hey, what's Brentsville like? Oh, Brentsville has a 5-minute wait. Maybe I should go over to Brentsville. Maybe I should go over to the office. So sometimes driving 5 or 10 more minutes will get you easy parking, no wait in line, and you can cruise right through. So hopefully that'll be a good tool. It's something we'll see if we want to kind of continue to use it or if we just kind of roll it out during major elections. But we'll have that up and running this week. So
How
Oh,
often will it be updated?
it'll be continuous, but
Continuous, okay. So every
but board meetings are not. I'm doing a presentation right now, so if there's comments at the end, people can ask those. But and I'm happy to talk with anybody after the meeting about any questions you guys have. Okay, election progress. So mail voting, as I noted, through Sunday we had 16,201 ballots returned. I think they marked a couple thousand more that have come in, so we're just past 18,000 there now. And I think we had 3,000 early voters, so we're at about 43,000 early voters through yesterday, about 18,000 mail ballots now, so just over 60,000 voters. Our envelopes needed cure rate is at 1.95%. This is great. This is down from what we typically see, which is 3 to 4%. I think that honestly, we haven't changed our envelope sign. That's continued to work. I think voters are just getting used to the information that they now have to put on it. And when you have consistency in that, you don't have law changes, it kind of makes it easier to complete that process. So in terms of the number cured, 53% cured. That'll continue to climb as we reach out to voters and send them forms to get them to cure their mistakes. I'm hoping that we see something more up in the 70% range, but we've gone from about 40% on this to 60% in recent elections, and the state gets most of the credit for that. They've made an easier form to use that we mail out to the voters, but our staff has done a great job of communicating with the voters. We have a tracking sheet we send to the party chairs, and you all see it every week. At the end of the week, you all get that so you can see who has a ballot cure, what the reason is they have to do it, when we called them, when we mailed them the form, so we have all that documented. So we have, a transparent process, and so the parties then have the opportunity to, in addition to our contact to them, if they so choose, they can reach out to, their voters and try to encourage them to cure their ballot situation. So you hate to see any of those, a voter that wants to vote have an issue, but you do have to, there are certain responsibilities you have as a voter to register, to fill out forms properly. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But that is part of the process. So coming up, we've got busy final weeks of early voting. Going to have our busiest weeks. This weekend will be crowded. Next week, probably all week, will be crowded. We're getting final preparations ready for Election Day. Getting our supplies ready and finalized to go out to voting sites. I'm working with the deputy directors on a staffing schedule, make sure we have everybody in the office. I mean, we have like it is a tactical sheet of where everybody has to be broken up by each day and parts of the day to make sure that we have coverage for all the different things we have to do, from our call center on Election Day that helps to support our polling places so the officers have support if they have questions or if they have a voter that has an issue that they need to handle. Continuing to handle issues as they arise. It's been a busy season with a lot of litigation, political things, a lot of elections in the news, a lot of questions. Whenever you have a lot of that stuff, that fuels voters to ask questions, which means we get more phone calls, have to clarify things. So but we are handling those. If you call our office, you're getting a response on the phone or you're getting somebody to call you back almost always within the same day. So we are being responsive to that. Same with our email. We have people monitoring that to get responses out quickly. So we have a whole team. We have 18 full-time staff as our allocation, but we have another 20 plus temporary staff that are all at the office, and everybody's got their specialty area. I have a media roundtable tomorrow with 8 election leaders. So that will be that'll be interesting. It's election directors from, I'm the Virginia person, there's Wisconsin, there's Georgia, there's Arizona, a lot of the states that are of high interest for this election. And there's going to be about 40 or 50 media members from all the national outlets and newspapers. We're going to go over questions, so it's a really nice way to, we get a lot of individual media calls. This is great to have one block of time, answer a bunch of questions, give the media some information, and it saves time for us and it provides good access for them. So it's a really nice thing that's happening tomorrow.
Is that going to be televised or streamed or?
It's like it's a stream thing, but I don't think it's a public thing. I think it's just media. They invite media members to it. This is a organization that is a national organization for large election jurisdictions. So we are a member of VRAV, which is our state General Registrars Association. So we can talk about, we have meetings and regional meetings and statewide meetings about how to improve our processes to help voters. This is an organization for large election localities, which is really nice because while we share the law that we have to follow with all of the counties around the state, how Madison County prepares for elections is not very similar to how we have to prepare for elections, but we are very similar to, large counties in Maryland or Ohio or Arizona or wherever in terms of, the logistics and the scaling that have to happen in a large county. So, emergency prep for Election Day. So we're working with the Elections Operations Center, the police, the fire. We met with them a couple times already. We just met with them last week. We are finalizing plans. We have backup plans in place for floods, power outages, all those kind of situations. If we have a polling place where it gets flooded and inside is not usable, but they could set up in the parking lot, we have tent things ready, and within an hour, anywhere in the county, we can transfer voting to outside to have it outside if need be. We also have alternative schools available if something is, let's say we have a real area that has a big power outage, we have those things ready. Now, some of those things would need some prior authorization and probably some board action on some of those items, but we are ready with the resources needed should we have those situations. We also have a security plan to monitor the polling places, so we will have, the police are not going to be at polling places, but they will have a security posture. They're going to be communicating about potential threats. They're going to be communicating with us. We get notices from federal agencies about, the possibility of threats. Generally, we're not seeing much this election. The greatest, most significant threat concern we've seen is basically from Iran and Russia, who are using, and it's not terrorism, it's misinformation and social media that they're using to try to sow chaos and to try to encourage conflict between people with different political views. So that's the main thing that we're seeing this election. So we are ready for those emergencies. In terms of Election Day staffing, our final officer staffing was sent out to the party chairs yesterday. We have one Republican and one Democratic chief or assistant chief in all precincts. By party, we have 433 Democratic officers and 425 Republican officers, 233 officers that do not have a party affiliation, so we're in full compliance with 24-2-115. We have had some cancellations. I think we had about 26 more Republican cancellations than we have Democratic cancellations, but thankfully because of all the efforts we've made at recruiting officers, and we've really tried to target in particular Republican officers, which we were short on, and Spanish-speaking officers, so we can have as many polling places as possible having translation services available to voters. We have increased those areas in particular. So if you look at our last 3 elections here, presidential elections, this is what our numbers looked like in 2016 and 2020. We were at about a 60-40 ratio. And those officers in those years too, there wasn't any party approval process or review process like we have now, so those officers were not. So I have no idea if the Democrats or the Republicans in those years were actually, Democrats or Republicans, or just someone that was asked, hey, we need another Dem, would you be a Dem? Hey, we need another Republican, would you be a Republican? The parties were not involved in this for decades until the last few years. So the election offices had to make do with what they could. And even in that scenario, we were pretty heavy towards the Dems, which makes sense in a county that leans Democratic. Now we're in a position where we're within a couple officers of each other, and that's been 3 years of targeted and smart recruiting to bring people into the fold. Thank you to the board members who have sent out letters on the Republican side, especially to try to get some Republican officers in here. We have our Democrats in the county. We have no shortage of election officers on the Democratic side. We could probably fill twice as many election officer spots as we have up there. But I'm happy to say that for, the first time in a long time, we actually have some extra Republicans. Not only are we staffed up to meet the code, but we have some people in backup positions. And that's also true in our leadership positions. We have a number of individuals right now that are not assigned as leadership positions currently, but are ready to move into those positions should they be so. Kudos to Dina and Rick on our staffing team. I gave them a directive when I started here to that team that we needed to fix this, and they've been the ones that have gone through and gotten the work done and made that happen. So they've done an excellent job. Our timeline for after the election. So early voting ends on the Saturday before the election. We always have people that show up on Sunday and Monday, even election day, at the early voting sites. And unless it is a polling place, which only a couple of them are, the early voting sites, early voting is done as of 5 p.m. on Saturday, November 2nd. Election day happens on the 5th. Canvass happens on the 6th. We have a contingency date for the 7th in case we need that much time, but we are getting a big canvass team this time, and I want to be able to check our results and know everything's good as quickly as we can. So I think we'll probably be done validating all the early voting, mail voting, and election day results on that Wednesday. Definitely the results, and hopefully the whole canvass process. And the canvass process is, I think most of you are probably familiar with it, but the canvass process is verifying that the results were accurate as reported by the precinct. Make sure somebody didn't have 631 on the sheet and they reported as 531 by accident, that they read it wrong. Our officers, make sure to bring your reading glasses. Make sure to, we tell them to do, to look at that carefully. And we have a lot of validation checks that we do on our end too when those results are coming in. So if something's really out of whack, if we see a precinct reported their turnout was, double what most of the precincts were, then we contact them before we report those results on the state website so that we have a chance to check in with them. The mail ballot receipt deadline is that Friday, November 8th at noon. So we have to wait there until we can process all the ballots that are arriving either on election day, that are being dropped off at the polling places, or that are arriving by that Friday, as long as they have been date stamped by election day, by the 5th. The Electoral Board will do their provisional ballot review on Wednesday, I keep wanting to say October, Wednesday, November 13th. And then certification takes place on Friday, November 15th. So just a reminder that when the election day is done, when you're seeing, states call for candidate X or candidate Y on TV, that's because the media there feels comfortable enough with the margins that they feel comfortable enough that saying, once the votes are finally counted, we think this is for sure going to be the candidate. And that they haven't always been right. Dewey beats Truman is the famous headline from the newspaper, and we've seen some issues with that. The Bush-Gore contest had some issues with that. Remember that, and I think people are used to it now. I think people are used to when a presidential election comes out, it's going to take a week or two before we really know the final results. But the reason that is important, and when we're talking about validation and the process being accurate, that's because that certification process has to happen. We've got to make sure there wasn't an issue at a polling place and look at any of the discrepancies that there were. And the board does that, through that process of certification. So we have to make sure that that's right. After that, on Wednesday, November 20th, there is a risk limiting audit that is a statewide audit of the Senate race. So we will pull ballots, a random selection of ballots. The state has a system where they give us numbers, and officers pull out random ballots out of the stack. We run those for results and report those to the state, and then the state aggregates those from all the jurisdictions, and it's just another way to audit the process. This is a requirement in Virginia. Most states do not have risk-limiting audits of any kind, or if they are, it's going to be 50-50. Not many states have it as a requirement before the election is certified. Virginia now does. Thursday and Friday are possible continuations of that risk-limiting audit. They are going to select one congressional race from the state, and they will do a batch audit of that race. So We have an 18% chance of having that. We'll see what happens with that. We have 2 congressional districts. There are 11 congressional districts in Prince William County. Ergo, 18% chance we get drawn. So, and as registrar, I've seen us both get drawn and not get drawn. So, I'm not sure of the timing of when the electoral board does that draw. I'm sure it's before, probably a week or more before that. So we will know that before that date. That's a possible date, but not a sure date at this point. So I mentioned this one already. Okay, so election concerns. I want to go through a few things related to how we work to identify problems, how we solve problems, and then some specific things. So in election planning, we identify problems through data and feedback. We have a lot of data from results. We get feedback from the public. We get feedback at board meetings. We get feedback from voters. You guys have channels through your parties of concerns that are raised. All of those things are things that we look at. We create plans to make sure we're meeting legal standards to maximize efficiency and also serve our voters. So we do have to meet the code, but we also have to do a lot of other things. In a large county, you have to think about how you are setting up your polling places to make sure that you're getting voters through in a timely way. We execute that plan and then we monitor progress. And then we start it all over again, and every 6 months or sooner, that feedback loop repeats, and we go back through and we continue to improve the process. Election management for our county involves more than 40 full-time equivalent staff, full-time staff, and then a number of temp staff. We have over 1,000 election officers. We have more than 600 pieces of equipment. We have 103 polling places. We have 6 early voting sites, and we've sent out more than 30,000 mail ballots. That might get close to 40,000 by the time we're done by the end of this week. We'll see. I know there's a lot of applications still coming in. So when we look at issues, and we're talking about all these people, things will go wrong. We will have problems. There will be discrepancies. There will be things to explain, to make sure we correct. And that is a constant process, as I talked about with that feedback loop. The problem scale that we look at, I have 2 lines there. Below that line is a perfect election. I think that is some kind of Greek or Norse myth that doesn't really happen. As I mentioned, all of those pieces of equipment, 1,000 election officers, they're talking about hundreds of thousands of transactions, and a few of those will have mistakes and issues with them. Above that line is fraud and negligence. That's bad. That's when I lose my job. That's when I could go to jail. That's when I've done a horrible job and have no business being a general registrar. I like to think I am far below that line of 14 years of professional service and some of the accolades that I've earned. What we mostly look at here are the minor and expected issues. So I'm pointing this out to note that we do expect some small issues as we go through an election. And our job as a staff and the board's job is to navigate those and evaluate those and look at how we can react to those and improve upon those, either whether that's in flight, while we're in process, we'll talk about one of those today, or hey, this is not something that's going to be addressed this election, but for a future election, this is a modification we can make. Maybe after election day we go, boy, our staffing was really a little more than we needed. Can we scale that back to meet our budgetary needs? Or, boy, our staffing was really underwhelming. We need more staff, and we need to appeal to the county to get more funds for election officers. So when we're talking about these things, we're mostly talking about expected issues and minor issues. If you've got a significant issue or a major issue, I know we had one election a couple years ago where our ballots didn't fit the scanners, and we've changed our logic and accuracy testing. That was a very significant issue. We did react to it very well, though, and only a couple hundred voters were impacted, and everyone that went out to vote was able to vote. But what we're talking about today are mostly minor and expected issues. So when we're identifying problems, we're not looking at rumors or speculation on social media, and we have to be wary of political agendas. While you all do serve political parties, my position is not partisan. And while the Democrats might say, we think the law should be this, and Republicans might say, we think the law should be this, we have to follow what the law is. We have to follow evidence and verified concerns. So I'm going to point out a couple that we've seen, one this election and one another election. We had a report from someone that said the Brentsville poll books are down, they're not working, and they're using manual poll books there. Well, we don't have paper poll books at the early voting sites. We have them on election day as a backup system, but we don't use those during early voting. You wouldn't be able to do that. The network has to be able to talk to all the different sites so that if I, as a voter, go over to Brentsville and vote, I can't leave there and go over to the DMV and vote and go to Haymarket and vote. The system prevents that from happening by constantly providing that update. So while the poll books on election day are not connected to a network in any way, the poll books during early voting have to be connected to a network to prevent fraud and issues. Another example, 2022, that election, precinct 612 did a hand count for some reason of their ballots and said that the machine was wrong, and said that the machine was 27 ballots off from what it was supposed to be. I don't remember what the total numbers were, but it was 27 ballots off from what it was supposed to be. This got on social media, it became a whole thing, and people spread it, and then when you spread that stuff, you're not verifying it, you're just using social media just to spread information around. So the board, in their doing their due diligence, got that box of ballots, they opened it up, and they checked to make sure that the number of ballots in that box matched the scanner. And it did. It took a couple hand counts to get there, but it did. The polling place said they were 27 off. Well, they had done all of their stacks in 25. So what happened was when they counted their stacks, they were one off from that. Also, when they made their stacks of 25, 2 of those stacks had an extra ballot in them, or one, I don't know which one I'm doing. They were off on those stacks, 2 of those stacks by 1. So when the board recounted it, and they recounted it a couple different times, they found that the voting machine at precinct 612 was exactly right in the number of ballots that it was supposed to have. The board then had to let go of that election officer because he wasn't following the protocol they were supposed to follow, didn't notify the office of that issue, and decided to help spread it on social media rather than doing the responsible thing which he was supposed to do as an election officer. So there are problems that arise, and one of the things we have to do is we have to go through and find out more about them and make sure that they are things that we need to respond to, or if they're just things that people are claiming and aren't actually true.
So what was the Brentsville situation?
I don't know. We don't have paper poll books, so I don't know what the issue was. I think the network might have. So the network is constantly connecting to all the sites, and occasionally the count there will have a slight delay. Just like if you've ever been at home and you go to get on your Wi-Fi and it stalls for a second, and then there it is. Well, the poll books have that happen, too sometimes, where it's a few minutes off. So that is, but I'm just guessing at that. I don't know. That would be my guess. Compliance. So we have to do decision making by the board and the GR. We have to have evidence and database approaches. We have to follow the Virginia State Code. We have to follow state guidance from ELECT. We have to follow federal laws. We've gotten a lot of complaints and concerns about different things that are not actionable by us. I think the first meeting I had with an election integrity group right after I started was, why can't you cancel voters that move? Well, there are federal laws and state laws that govern that, and I can't just go, oh, you sent me a list with all these voters, I'm just going to cancel them all. The chaos that would ensue if we allowed people to do that would basically be the political parties going, hey, these particular voters need to be taken off, and you would have the voter rolls, be a political war ground rather than having us follow the federal laws and the state laws that apply to them. So we have to consider all that when you all are making decisions, when you all are planning out actions and passing motions, when we are planning for elections, we have to take that all into consideration. Our staff has years of dedication to ensuring elections are accurately and done correctly. I've come to a number of meetings where people will speculate about the staff. Oh, they could be doing this, they could be doing that. Well, they're monitored, they're oathed. That's not to say they can't make a mistake. That's not to say there can't be problems, but we identify those. And I think our office in particular has been very transparent in trying to provide, we provide more materials from these meetings than any county that I'm aware of. You can go see a video, you can look at all the materials. We post our scanner results online. We're the only county that I know in Virginia that did that. If somebody else has started doing that, they're doing that because we started doing that. And there's not many in the nation that did that. In my meeting, had a pre-meeting before that press thing, I talked about that, and several of the election administrators in other states went, well, that's a good idea, we should do that. And I also got a good idea on that. Apparently, one of the counties that's there has something called Paws to the Polls, which I thought was great. They have the pet adoption agencies set up. They set up little pens at the early voting sites in line. So, and they let people come, and if nothing else, they get to pet the dogs while they're waiting for early voting, or maybe they get to take a few pets home. So there's a lot of good ideas and things that are happening in elections. So it was really great to get to hear some of the innovations and things that people are doing in transparency and encouraging people to get out and vote in a number of different ways. So my last thing on this would be a reminder that human beings and professionals are who occupy our office, and they deserve respect for the hard work they do, not only in a regular election, but certainly in the challenging circumstances that we've seen over the last 5 years. So I've said it before at meetings, and if you want to come into a meeting and criticize a decision I make or a decision the board makes, that's great. We are public figures, we are decision makers, and that is the public's right to come do that. But if you are attacking the character of individuals, if you are attacking junior staff who are taking direction from the leadership team that's here, that's over the line for me. And so I think people need to be aware of that. Okay, so I want to talk about a few specific areas of concern then as they relate to this particular election. So we've had a lot of people come up and talk about mail ballot intake, and people often call this ballot curing when they've had public comments. So ballot curing is literally just the process of us identifying a ballot in a spreadsheet that needs to be cured and sending a mail out to the voters and contacting them, and the chairs get and the board both have access to that information. So I think when people are talking about this, what they're talking about is actually intake, when the ballots arrive at our office. The board members have seen this in action. That entire process, what has been said is, this is just a hole that nobody knows what happens in it. Well, that's not a fair statement. There is election security that has to be considered. And when you're talking about election integrity is a balance of transparency and election security. And you have to have both. And the board and me and my decisions have to consider both in that process. So that entire process is documented. When the ballots arrive, it's documented. As the staff is marking those ballots having been received, that's going into the various system. When they're being processed through pre-processing, it's documented the whole stage. Also, any voter can track their ballot. You can sign up for a free service, and this is one of the great things when we switched to K&H. We have access to ballot tracks. It's a free service, and in my opinion, it's the best mail voting tracking service in the country. And it lets a voter see, okay, my ballot is in the mail on its way to me. Okay, my ballot's arrived at my house. All right, the office has received my ballot. Okay, they've counted my ballot. Pre-processing has finished, and they've counted my ballot. So you can track that the whole way. So any voter that wants to go see where their ballot has gone, they can go see that. All the employees that are under oath when they do this process, just like our election officers are, and we have board members that are welcome to come in and observe that process anytime, and I know you all have come in. I think, Marcus, have you had a chance to see that yet, or no?
I've seen the intake process.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll see the other part on Friday.
Okay, yes, gotcha. So I talked a little bit about our improved cure process for this. We do provide, again, all of that data is sent to the party chairs. We do add additional seals for secrecy. We do 3 steps of verification. So when those mail ballots are coming in, there's an initial check just to make sure that you can scan the form on the envelope that the voters have to complete just to see if it's missing the birth year entirely. That's really easy to check, and you can put that into the pile that needs to be cured. After that, we do 2 steps. So the staff that is reviewing these envelopes initially, they are twice checking each envelope to make sure that the voter's information is matching up, the birth year, all of that information. And then it's again going to get checked by the officers when they go to actually pre-process it, at which point they would disaggregate the ballot from the mail envelope, and they would put it through for counting, the results of which obviously are not released until after Election Day is over. I want to note too that we've had a lot of physical security upgrades since I've started at our facility for accessing rooms, accessing our facility. Everything is marked. When you go into certain rooms, you know exactly who went in there and exactly what time, and there are limits of who could go into what areas when, If you are at our office and you're a temp employee, you're not allowed to stay there without a supervisor being there. So we have a lot of internal policies and a lot of physical security upgrades, and our entire facility is under camera, under motion sensors. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we first installed our security system, we were having a little problem with one of the back door was setting off the alarm when it shouldn't have been, and it was usually me because I was there late. And I know that our response time is real fast because I've experienced it, having set off the alarm a couple times by accident, and walking to the door with my hands up to the police officer and being like, "It's just me, I'm the election director, I have my ID." So we have a lot of security upgrades. If anyone's trying to mess with our office, we have a lot of physical security that covers that space. And that has been a significant upgrade. We also, unlike 2020, we don't have mail ballots in different locations. They're all in our office. They are mailed from our vendor, and then they're all in our office. So we took care of that space concern that we had. Related to this too, when we hear some of these things about concerns that people have, and we take them seriously. You know, we've investigated them. The board has directed me to look into things. When you guys do, I look into it. I give you the research and tell you what we've got. Sometimes we identify a problem. Sometimes we see there's no problem. But in this problem, in 3 years, I don't have a complaint from a person that's called up and said, "I sent my ballot in. I know it arrived there, and it got destroyed." I don't have a single one in 3 years. So if this was a problem, I think I would have at least a couple complaints from people. We do know that sometimes people have had issues with the mail, where the mail is a little bit slow. And I would encourage anybody to, if you have a mail ballot right now and you're going to return to this election, you know, don't wait, get it in. You don't want to have that. Or take it to an early voting site and just drop it off there. We do have a lot of voters that use that option. You can just come in the door. There's a drop-off box at each location, and you can put that in. And we do not have drop-off boxes in the county other places. They are all under the supervision of election officers, only at our early voting site or only at our main office. So that's all to say, when we do this kind of things and we think about these things, election security has to be balanced with election transparency. So we have to think about that when we make decisions. Non-citizen, do you all want me to stop after each topic just to kind of, do you guys want
We'll
questions
break,
about the mail intake or anything?
we'll break in if we.
Okay. Interrupt me. We don't have any water today off site. I'm
President,
running low on hydration here.
Logistics Committee didn't bring water for the board.
No, we didn't have any. Okay, so non-citizen registrations and voting. I know this has been a big issue in the news, and I want to clarify some things. We talked about this at a last meeting, and I want to make sure people are clear on some things as to what we've done on this. I know there's some law. I know the governor came out with an executive order that was related to that. I know there's a lawsuit, pending. Those parties will have to sort out what those issues are. But I want to talk about, our portion of this. So we have canceled voters per the state guidance on this issue. We had somebody, they called us and said, "Are you guys not?" No, we're following the law and the executive order. And the executive order on this, the only thing the executive order changed in terms of this process is we used to get a non-citizen report every month, and we would take those voters off. Now we get a non-citizen report every day. So it's just a velocity thing. Instead of getting 15 voters at a report at the end of the month, now every other day we get one voter. So it really hasn't changed the cadence or the process. It just happens more often now than it used to, but it's at the same rate that it was. We've done extensive research for the board about this. We talked about this back in May, long before this kind of became bigger national news. And I know that the media reporting, I've read some articles on our investigation of this, and I read one that said we looked at 160 voters and 43 of them had voted, and we found that there was strong evidence that all of those were citizens, which means that the other 120 some voters were obviously non-citizens. That's not true, so I want to clarify all that. I have non-citizen in quotes here because I want to make clear, non-citizen is a Veris database term. It is what they use to describe this process. It is not a dispositive legal finding that this individual is a non-citizen. And what we found in our research is that we don't really know for sure. We have strong indications, but we don't know for sure. But what we have done is we've canceled this many voters each year. So about 200 to 300 voters each year. So this is a really small pool. This amounts to 0.07% of our registered voters. We have 330,000 plus registered voters in Prince William County. So this is 0.07%. We do see it's higher in federal years, which makes sense. More people might check the I want to register to vote box on their DMV form in those years. But the annual rates are pretty similar. There's not a huge difference one way or the other. A little higher this year, but it is a presidential year. And we are following the left guidance on this. So when voters come in to a hopper, we get a voter's information, we see that they're on this list, and we cancel them. And I should note that's really all the information we have. Our office does not get any documentation on this. So we don't have a visual of the form that's been sent that that voters filled out at the DMV. We don't even have the data sheet that has been supplied from the DMV to elect. We don't know how that process works. So elect populates a hopper by their guidance and by the code. We have to remove those voters, but we don't know if they are citizens or non-citizens, and we're not provided any evidence. We don't know if that voter checked, no, I'm not a citizen. We don't know if the voter didn't see that box. We don't know if there's people at the DMV that are entering this information into a data sheet, and then, Marcus, you okay?
I'll live. Excuse me.
We need that water. We don't know if there's a clerical error that could have put somebody on this list as well. So,
Thank you.
this is an example of this form. I just thought it was helpful to see what it looks like. And this is a form that registrars across the state have not, all would report that there's some issues with. So just from I started off my career and I did a lot of form design when I started off. And I will say, from a form design perspective, usually having part of the form be below the title of the form is not ideal form design. If you look at this form, both the I want to register to vote question is on the right and the citizenship question is on the left. They're above the title, so people that want to register to vote might miss this form, that part of the form in general. It also, if you're looking at it, it kind of looks like an office use only section. But this problem is kind of compounded by the fact that this form is on a clipboard at a site, it might block some or all of that form. So it makes it really difficult given the fact that we know there's known issues with the form, and given the fact that we're not actually supplied with any documentation or even the data on this, it just goes into a hopper and we act. We don't know what the status of these individuals are. Now, we did review a sample of these back in May. The board asked me if we would take a look at this, and we did extensive research on it. Natalia Taylor and myself looked at a lot of records of voters it was a sample of maybe roughly a year, about 160 voters. I think it was a little less than a year. It wasn't any particular time frame. We found that every individual, we looked at 160 voters, and we looked in particular at the 43 of those voters that had voted. So again, we're talking about 0.07% of the voters. It's a very small group. Beyond that, we're talking about only about a quarter of the voters typically have voted that are in this group at all. I would imagine some of them have no idea they were even registered, and maybe they didn't check the wrong box on the form or something like that. So every individual that we looked at that had voting history had a social security number, and they had verified their citizenship previously, some by as many as 5 times. I should note that if you come to our office and you fill out, let's say you're updating your address, you've moved. You come to our office and you fill out a form to update your address, and you don't check the citizenship box. There's no code requirement. You would not be removed from the voter list if you checked that form, but you are if you complete the form at the DMV. And I'm guessing part of that is because we don't actually have the form itself. So again, not having the actual documentation on this, not having the visual on this, provides issues on both sides. It doesn't allow us to identify non-citizens who potentially should be prosecuted for voting. We don't want non-citizens voting, and I think even the specter of being prosecuted is good to tamp that down. We also don't want to remove citizens who have verified that they're a citizen and claimed they're a citizen 5 different times over a span of 10 or 15 years to be removed from the rolls because they didn't see a box when they were at the DMV getting a license. So we have to remove these voters from the list. I don't see any substantiated reason, given a complete lack of evidence and a lack of documentation and a lack of knowledge of the process, to refer these individuals for prosecution. It's a problem on both sides, and I think the state could solve it if they just got the DMV to share those images. Then we could group these individuals in different groups and say, these are citizens that just forgot to check the form. These are non-citizens who need to be removed from the roll, and these are non-citizens who attempted to vote and would have to be prosecuted. Studies in other states that have been done repeatedly have shown that the number of non-citizens who have attempted to vote is extremely, extremely small. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying it's not possible that some of the individuals in that group couldn't have been some of those individuals. But I don't have any evidence as a registrar to go on, and the state process does not lend me documentation or information to refer it. So the voter list is owned by the state. This is a picture of our Attorney General, Jason Miyares. Jason Miyares does not require any permission from me or the board to do his duties. So the state owns the list and the state has the opportunity to review it, then they would be in the position to know whether there's prosecution that should be recommended in this case. So I wanted to make clear that, one, we have removed voters from the list as we are required to by state guidance. And two, after doing extensive research into this, we don't have any reason to refer individuals to prosecution because I literally don't have any evidence outside of the list that, again, is owned by the state. We interact with the state voter registration list. It ultimately belongs to the state. We are given use to it. That is the opposite of when voting is happening in our county and we have to refer prosecution to the Commonwealth's attorney because we know of the actions that are happening. So, and we do have 2 individuals right now who have, I'm referring to the Commonwealth's attorney, and I can talk with you all about that more in closed session. But we do identify individuals who have potentially tried to vote twice. Now, it could be a mistake. Honestly, when I was the deputy director in Arlington, I can't tell you how many times I had a voter come in and go, I think I voted this election, but I'm not sure. And that's what happens when you have a 45-day early voting period and you have so many elections, people start to conflate things together and they're not sure. So thankfully, the thing to do if you are a voter and you don't know is go ask it out, look above the poll book, and don't attempt to vote twice. You have some water over there. Marcus, do you want some water?
Good, thank you, Keith.
Okay, I'm good. I'm almost through.
Rookie move, I didn't bring my own.
I'm almost made it, but I appreciate it. So we do refer people when we have evidence that they're doing things that are against the code, and I have an obligation to do that. This case is very complicated, and I know there's a legal battle going on right now, and I think, I've been asked about it, and we got called from the DOJ just to provide them with some factual information on it, and we've seen the governor's thing, and I think that both sides here, honestly, I think they're politicizing it. I don't think anybody's innocent of not politicizing this issue to some degree. And as a registrar, my preference would be figure out a way to solve it and fix it so that both sides are happy, because I don't see any reason that can't be accomplished here. This is not the Democrats are right, the Republicans are wrong, or vice versa. There are steps that could be taken in terms of transfer of documentation and information here that could solve the problem. And it's not going to happen before this election, obviously, but that's something that could be worked on for next election. So I'm not going to go all the way back to my problem identification slide, but if you're looking at I don't know where this would range, significant problem, I think there are solutions here. But I don't run the DMV, I don't design their forms. The board does not make decisions about what the state does. So this is something that the State Department of Elections and the State Board of Elections and the DMV and all the legal parties involved are going to have to work through. And hopefully they can, work that through to something that is to the benefit of all of the voters, so that we know that non-citizens are not voting, so that we make sure that people that maybe have accidentally voted are not persecuted for that, so that we make sure that our election results are accurate and don't have non-citizens on them. But I will say that the promotion of the idea that tons of non-citizens are voting, tens of thousands of non-citizens. It's really not happening. I mean, even in the ones identified here, which our review showed are likely, many are likely citizens, it doesn't amount to the numbers that are that significant. So I hope they solve it, but we get a lot of calls about this and emails and things about it, and it's not. We're doing what we're supposed to do, and our obligation is, and hopefully in the future this will be resolved, because I think the constant political hand-wringing over this and back and forth about it doesn't actually solve the problem, which I think is a solvable problem. So, ballot scanners are accurate. So we get a lot of questions. We had a gentleman at early voting who was looking behind the scanner after he voted, and he said to the officer, "I'm just making sure it's not connected to the internet." And I don't think he knows how that's not how the internet works. But this is a common thing that we're getting. The ballot scanners are not accurate, they're connected to the internet, there's all these problems. So we do LNA testing before every election. I mentioned this earlier, we've tested more than 10,000 ballots this election. An audit will be done after the election to also verify that the machines are accurate, and recounts have repeatedly held up. Our scanners are also not connected to the internet. We use Hart InterCivic. They are a company that produces ballot scanners and ADA equipment. We do not have modems in our machinery. They can do them. When I worked with DC, we had ES&S machines. They had a modem inside them, and in DC, we reported the results on election night through a secure cellular service that would then, when the officers closed down the machine, it would put the results out, and we'd get them directly in the office. Now, there's certainly arguments against that in terms of security. The benefit it did have is we never had to play the telephone game with officers entering the numbers wrong. They were coming directly from the machine, and we still had to go through the same canvassing process. So I think having them not connect to the internet is clearly better from a security perspective. And elections in the United States in general are decentralized at the state and county level with machines and equipment that is largely not connected to the internet. I think Hart does have some. I think Michigan does have some of their machines connected to the internet. But our scanners are by law, not connected to the internet and do not have that capacity. So I wanted to know, when people are talking about, and we've seen this with Waynesboro saying, how could we know that the machines are counted incorrectly, and other places, how do we know the machines? Well, we know this because not only do we do the LNA testing and we've had audits, but we've seen audits and recounts hold up time and again. So 2023, last year, Loudon did a batch audit, and they audited more than 2,500 ballots. They found there was a 5-vote difference, and the difference was not because the machine had any issue, it's because the voters had incorrectly marked the ballot. So anytime you have an audit or a recount, and you're evaluating, overvotes or undervotes, you're going to see some voters that maybe didn't fill out the box correctly, but maybe they circled the person or they put a big arrow, this person. Sometimes people do that. So their audit found that their machines counted everything exactly right, except for 5 voters who just didn't mark their ballot correctly. In 2023, we had a recount with Stafford County, more than 5,200 ballots, and we found that was found to have identical results. We actually used the ballot scanners from Election Day had generated all our results initially, and this was I believe the 7th district Republican primary between Nikki Baldwin and Maria Martin. We ran the results. The recount featured both. We used our high-speed scanner to run those results, so it was a different machine. And then the judge ordered that we hand count part of those results, so both of those processes were in play. The results ultimately came out to be identical. It was a 2-vote difference in that race at a 5,200 plus ballots, and it came out to exactly 2 in the end. In the 5th district this year, the Republican primary there was over 60,000 votes in that race, and the recount was done, and the lead, and I think there were 7 or 8 counties involved in that. The recount changed that lead from 374 votes to 370 votes, so a 4-vote difference. So a number of incidents, not only do we prepare before the election and we have the audit after the election, but a number of things that have happened where we've had to do audits and recounts that have showed that the process is working well and counting results accurately. We have not seen the same issue with hand counting. So I wanted to point out, these are the forward hand counts that I've seen in Prince William County since I started. We had an observer one during LNA. We let them count the ballots. They got it wrong. They had to do it 2 or 3 times before they finally got the count right. In the 2022 general election, that precinct 612 that I talked about earlier, the officers counted was off by 27. Understandable. You're tired at the end of the day, and they made a mistake, and it wasn't anything dishonest. The ballots stick together sometimes. You miss one because they stick together. You count the broad stacks, and they don't add up. The board, when they recounted that same precinct to verify it, had the same issue. It took 3 times because 2 of those ballots were sticking together. So we had the board and election officers, both were involved in that recount. And those stacks, we kept having one that was hiding. And finally, after 3 times, verified those results. Then they did it again to make sure. And the results were found to be accurate to 531 ballots in precinct 612. That recount that I talked about in our county, while it was accurate initially, the one part of it that had an issue was the hand count. The judge ordered a hand count. I think London and Keith, you were probably there. Maybe both of you. I know you guys had to be. I think you guys rotated because it took a few days. The judge ordered a hand count for part of the results. And when they did the hand count, that race was only separated by 2. When they did the hand count initially, they found the results were different by 1, meaning it briefly was a tie. We had to redo that hand count. They found it matched the original results. We had to redo the hand count again and again match the original results. But in all these instances, the people that were involved here, the election officers, the board, it's not that people are not capable of counting ballots. It's difficult to do a repetitive task over and over again, especially when you're tired. And so in our examples, what we found is the recounts and the audits and the machines have worked well and performed like they're supposed to. That doesn't mean that there's not ever a possibility for a machine to have an issue, but that's why you have a canvas. Check that process. If we had an election where we had a precinct that gave us, they had 580 check-ins, but they only had 320 ballots, well then that would be a concern. We want to figure out what that issue was. So it is possible for a machine to have a problem. I'm not saying that machines are infallible, but what we've seen is the machines generally do a very good job, and people have consistently had problems. Both can do the job perfectly, but usually it takes humans a little bit more time. So when we're talking about these different things, and when people are bringing general concerns about these different things, know that we are looking and examining these issues. This is what we do for a living. It's what I've been doing for 14 years. We're evaluating problems, we're looking at solutions, we're correcting them, making sure the process is going well. So this is then related to specific concerns from this election that we've had to evaluate. So some of these are general, some of these are specific. The size and the space at early voting locations. That's been a challenge. I mean, I mentioned DMV, we're getting a lot of people through, but the space there is small. One of the supervisors came by while we were at the DMV, and she said, well, we might have outgrown this place. And, you know, it's hard to have different facilities. What you want is really, Haymarket is really ideal. You want a big open room with nothing in it, so you can set up as many voting stations and as many check-in stations as you can to move voters through and make it a nice space for people to go through. Some of our spaces, it's a challenge, but early voting sites in particular are very hard. Election day, we're just there for the one day schools are closed, that's fine. You can't do early voting in a school very well, it's hard. So you need other spaces, and unfortunately, in my experience with other counties, Prince William County does not have a robust number of recreation centers and community centers. When I was in Montgomery County, we had 17 massive rec centers. Those were our early voting sites. We had gymnasiums or large rooms in all of those to assist voters. So that's a problem we'll have to continue to look at. We had one slow ballot scanner taken out of service. We had a Haymarket scanner. It was dragging. It seemed like it was just going slow. I don't know if the rollers were having an issue or something with the hardware or software, but we just decided to take it out before it became a problem. So each election, we logic and accuracy test 4 additional scanners for early voting for exactly this kind of problem, so that when it does happen, and so we don't have a count that's off, we pull them out of service. But right now, our voter checked in, at least through Sunday, I remember I checked, Sunday, we had 40,455 ballots cast, and I believe we had 40,455 ballots cast. We had one less check-in, and we had a voter that was transferred from Prince William County to another county by a different jurisdiction. So must have voted and then moved. And unfortunately with Veris, there's some issues with that. Hopefully new Veris that they're going to launch next year will correct that problem. We've had I have 2 complaints about a hole in the mail ballot envelope. So this is not anything new. The mail ballot envelope at the bottom has a small hole. It's just a quality check where you can see if there's a ballot inside of it. Now it may sound silly, but every election we get a number of mail ballot envelopes returned that do not have a ballot inside of it. So it allows the team to see if there's a ballot in there or not. And someone said, well, if you line up the hole in some way, you might be able to see one of the contests. Well, I checked a couple hundred of these envelopes myself. There was one envelope I saw where you could see the contest if you kind of lean to the side a little bit. But what we looked at as we were examining it was you really had to fold your ballot in a weird way and position it a certain direction in the envelope for that to happen. So we can certainly consider removing that hole in the future if the board thinks that that's not really necessary for verification. We can look at that. We already talked to our vendor. It's pretty standard for them. Fairfax uses the same company. They have the same positioning on theirs. But certainly something we could get rid of in the future. But we have looked at it and don't see where it's an issue with the regularity that occurs. Voters can always make sure if there is a hole in the ballot, they always make sure your ballot doesn't line up with it. And I think what you have to do is you have to fold the ballot. The ballot already has a natural fold. And people open it up and they just generally put it back and then they slide it in. If that's the case, you would never see it. But if you reverse that fold and then you put it in a certain direction and you position the ballot in a certain way, so you really have to work at it. I'm not saying it's not possible, but you do really have to work at it to get it to be like that. So we have observed that. We check that out. Like I said, we investigate these things when we get the complaints. Parking and traffic at Haymarket is another thing we've had a couple complaints about. I know I've gone up there and looked at it. I think board members have gone up. You all have visited up there. I don't think it's something we're going to be able to solve for this election. The challenge really is the campaign tents are set up on these islands, and sometimes as voters are going by, I think the campaigns have generally been good about not going up to cars, but sometimes as voters are going by, the voters are congregating right next to where the campaign tents are. It narrows the lane of traffic. There's only one lane that goes out there. That's the lane that tends to get slowed down. So we had some complaints there aren't enough parking spaces there. There have been enough parking spaces, but the flow of traffic there is slowed a little bit. The site officers there have also noted to us that they tend to kind of come in waves from the light that's down the road. You get a lot of cars that back up and turn left there, and then you kind of tend to have no cars, 7 cars all entering the parking lot at the same time. So it's something we will look at for the future. But we do try to look at pedestrian safety and those kind of things. We had 2 poll books that were added that had trouble syncing. So we set up our poll books. Each site has a certain number of poll books. The DMV and Haymarket, as high volume sites, have 4. The rest of the sites had 2. We noticed a couple things. One, Ferlazzo has got enough room that they could add another poll book there to get a lot of voters through because they have the space. The DMV has a lot of curbside voters and a lot of provisional voters. So the chiefs really needed some help to help process. The chief and the assistant chief there are working the poll books to handle the curbside voting and the provisional voting. So we tried to add a poll book to the DMV location and the Ferlazzo location to improve just the flow of the process there. Unfortunately, when we did that, there was a syncing issue. So all the sites are communicating constantly throughout the day, back and forth, so that they know this person's checked in here, they can't check in here. Or this person hasn't checked in this election, they can come and vote. Or this person can check in, but they got a mail ballot. So if they have it with them, they need to turn it in. If they don't, they need to fill out a gold form, whatever the situation is. Those 2 poll books, at the end of each day, then we take all that poll book data and voter credit, and that gets uploaded into Veris, and Veris has the voter credit, and then the poll books are updated back with an updated file that says, okay, zeroed out now because all these voters have voted, they now have voter credit. Well, each machine had a random number, one was like 16 and one was like 30, of voters that were on those machines, and that number persisted. So they should have gone up, zeroed out. And those voters were in the poll book, so they had voted already. If a voter came in on any of those poll books and they tried to vote, it would say they voted already. So there was no opportunity here where someone could vote that shouldn't have been able to vote. Nobody could be able to vote twice. There was no issue here where someone coming in wouldn't have been able to vote because of the poll book issue. The data still matched up, but it's almost as if on those two poll books, while the other voters were in the system as having voted on a previous day and not with the total today, it was like every day they had voted today. So we removed those poll books yesterday. We had them out there for a few days. I think they went out there Wednesday or Thursday last week. We were trying to fix the issue and see how to get the credit to reset so that it would reset at 0, but it wasn't resetting. So, in a move, Marcus went out and checked out one of the sites and talked to the officers there, called me. We talked about it some, and I just decided that it just, it's not worth some concerns over that, so we just went ahead and removed them. But as I noted earlier, our number of check-ins and our number of ballots are within one of each other's, which is what we expect. We're going to have 100,000 early voters. With that many voters, the numbers don't always match up exactly. You have a voter that checks in and then leaves and doesn't vote their ballot, or they put their ballot and it gets rejected and they're gone, or you have an officer that makes a mistake on a poll book. There's a number of things that happen that don't happen very often. Military voters can sometimes change that number a little bit because they're not processed in the same way in the poll books. They're given voter credit through Veris, but they do cast a ballot on the machine. So there's a couple of those little exceptions where if you have 100,000 voters and you go, okay, 100,000 voters checked in, and we've got 99,997 voters checked in, or 100,003 voters checked in, then the state has a allowance, and if there is a certain threshold that number is variant, then the board and our office has to explain that in the certification at the local level. If it's below a certain threshold, there's an expectation that there could be a couple off here and there, and we see that. It happens less so at early voting because our early voting staff is very experienced, and those are some of our best officers, and they do it every day, so they know what they're doing. It happens a little bit more on election day. We have a lot of officers there. So anyway, we removed those two poll books. I did talk to the legal counsel for the state Republican Party, called with some concerns about it. I explained to him, what the situation was, how it worked, that it didn't impact, that it didn't prevent a voter from voting, and didn't allow a voter that shouldn't have been voting to vote. He said he appreciated it. So it was Brian Chilton from the he was the legal counsel for the state Republican Party. So he contacted us about us, and he was satisfied with that explanation. So it's unfortunate. I would love to be able to have a couple more poll books out there that would help us with, improving. So that'll be something after the election that we'll have to talk about, either preliminarily setting up additional poll books so they're ready in case they're needed, or talking with our vendor about how we could be able to add a poll book to a site once it's open. The last one had some complaints about signs at Haymarket, signs being stolen, campaign signs, that kind of thing. We don't have a control outside that 40-foot line, generally. You can't have a loudspeaker out there, you can't have a firearm out there displaying a firearm. There's a few things outside that 40-foot line, but the regulation of the signs is not something that we delve into, and we are thankful for that, because we do not want to be in a situation where we are deciding, this campaign or that campaign. So if there is a concern about a campaign sign that you think is not correct, then or if you have a complaint about a sign being stolen from your yard or from a campaign site, that's something you're going to have to file with the police as a criminal matter. That's what we've referred people to in those instances. So those are all kind of the things that we've had this election. Couple last things here. Got through the problems there and discussed that. And a couple pieces of good news on the end here. So voter education, we are providing answers and information for the public. We do a lot of explaining how processes work in phone calls and emails. in our documents we provide. We are improving transparency with innovation. I talked about some of the things that we've done earlier in that regard, providing primers for the public, providing primers to observers and events, posting our tapes online, all of those kind of things. Reaching out to media outlets, trying to help dispel myths, trying to help people get factual information, not only about election security and some of those concerns, but also, our main concern at this point is just helping people get to the locations and places they need to go to vote. And like I said, answering more than 2,400 calls so far. We have a number of documents. We have one called the Election Security Series, where we talk about election security concerns related to 4 different areas. I think it's voter registration and equipment security and some other things. We also have something called How It Works, which is there's one on election night reporting, on results reporting. There's one on mail voting. There's one on voter registration. So those documents are on our website. We have them in the lobby of our office. We handed them out to people that came to our open house series a couple months ago. And those provide some information to the public. We've also sent letters to the editor and things like that to try to help people understand some misconceptions about voting. We especially talked to Potomac Local, Inside Nova, and the Prince William Times are kind of our 3 local papers that our voters use. So we try to communicate with them regularly, whether it's about something like this, like a guest column about misconceptions about voting, or whether it's just hey, this is how many. They love to do articles on how many early voters have come through and things like that, or if there's something that's happening around the state, they might call us to get some perspective on it. So I wanted to mention some things about civility. So I wanted to give a thank you to our 2 party chairs, Jacob Alderman and Sam Chisholm. They put together this real nice joint letter that talked about civility and talked about voters respecting one another and not stealing each other's signs, and how we should be able to go out and support the candidates that we like. I think this is a great thing. I wish every county would do this, because I think that when you talk to people about their trust in the election process, most people don't have distrusts that are placed towards national concerns, towards other places and things that they read. Studies show that most people have trust in their local election officials. It's worth noting, all local election officials are in all of those places and are trusted generally by their people. That's not always true. There are mistakes that get made, obviously. But I think this kind of thing is good in helping. Should be able to go out on election day, vote for the candidates that we want. And I mentioned earlier seeing people in t-shirts, and people weren't giving each other barbs about that kind of stuff. They were letting the people go out and peacefully vote. I noted this in our voter guide as well, just about that, look, we need to respect other people and their decisions. We need to understand that after the election happens, it'll be a close election, there'll probably be some lawsuits. But when the results are the results, once they're final and they're certified, and those individuals are sworn into office, then a large number of people are going to be disappointed. If we have very close elections, then by definition a significant portion, just under 50%, or maybe even over, in the presidential race, will be disappointed in those results. And whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, we should think about what are the things that we've talked about today that can be improved within the system and within the framework of the government that we have, and what solutions work there. Not spreading conspiracy theories and skeptical and just rumors that don't actually help us solve problems, but just perpetuate dislike and hatred for each other that I don't think we should have as Americans. For my part, I haven't voted since I took this job. I don't know if I've ever made that clear in a meeting. I talked to London about it a while ago, and we were having a discussion, and London was like, "You don't vote?" And I said, "No, not since this job. I wouldn't want anybody to question that I'm trying to do anything in my job other than execute a good election." So I miss voting. I love voting. I've always voted, before this job. But given the current situation of our society, given how people feel about elections at times, I will look forward to the day when I'm not in this position anymore for a number of reasons. I'm I've said before, one of the proudest days was getting this job, and I'm sure the most exciting day after that will be the day that it's not my job anymore. And I will look forward to voting, when that day comes. Until then, the will of the people will be upheld. We have election process that works. I oversee that process, and I'm fine with sitting out my one vote. If that helps anybody, one or two or even 5 people, say, okay, that helps me believe a little more that he's given up his vote to make sure that the process is done right. That's what I've been doing. So, last thing, fiscal 26 budget. Talked about this a little bit last time. I think there's a really cool item in here that people are all going to be really interested in. We did put forward our initiative. It was, we're calling it the ERIP. It's the Equipment Replacement and Improvement Plan. This is a $2.4 million plan. Every 10 years or so, equipment reaches the end of its life cycle. Our equipment is reaching the end of its life cycle. And what you don't want to see is what we had at Haymarket, where as the machines start to get older, you start to see breakdowns and problems occur more frequently. And we've been monitoring this for the last couple of years. We have not had breakdowns or incidents that exceed what are in the normal range, but we don't want to get to a point where we are. So this is $2.4 million to replace that equipment at the 10-year mark. We get about $500,000 in discounts from our vendor if we move forward with this. They were going to buy back our old machines, mostly just as a way to give us a discount, which is great because getting rid of those machines I worked in DC, and we had a whole warehouse that was just filled with old machines that, because they were government property, we couldn't destroy, and because they were old, nobody wanted them, and so storage of old machines is actually a really big elections problem that most people are probably unaware of. This is going to be hopefully paid for over will be paid for over at least 2 fiscal years, maybe 3. We're going to work with OMB, and of course this all depends on the approval of the Board of County Supervisors. But I think the 10-year replacement line is a really important thing because, not to threaten the county supervisors in any way, but if they opt to not replace the equipment and we have equipment problems, then the board and our office can't be held responsible for those issues. It's then on the Board of County Supervisors. So I think they have a strong incentive to replace that equipment within the proper timeline to make sure that it's replaced. Outside of that, when you get to, if you've ever replaced a roof on a house or a sewage system, there's nothing exciting about having to do these things. They are necessary at times. But when you replace your roof, when you start off, you had a roof, and when you end, you have another roof. So there's nothing exciting about it. This new system comes with some interesting features, though. So there's a new standard from the EAC that there's not even an approval of a system yet for this, but our vendor is in the process of getting the approval for it. Other vendors are going to be following shortly as well. It's the VVSG 2.0 standards. That's a security standard from the Election Assistance Commission. That's the federal agency that sets out guidelines for these. And while states are not required to follow those, many states do adopt and follow those. And they have a whole bunch of different standards from, data encryption to physical security features. So this is sort of the latest, security is always is a constant one-up game where you're just constantly trying to stay ahead of security risks. So this is the latest in those standards. This is also half the weight of our current equipment. This is great news to the many senior citizens who work our polls. And those machines, I know a few people in the room are nodding their heads like, yeah, they're heavy. Good news. These are about half the weight of the current ones, so they will be much easier to lift. They also have improved ADA functionality. So for voters with disabilities that use these, whether that's something simple like just I need bigger print and I would like a machine where I can see the ballot larger, to someone that is paralyzed, there are options for them to vote. Most interesting one at the bottom of the list here, there's a confirmation screen for voters that allows them to confirm their paper ballot selection. So something we hear constantly. I mentioned earlier all the things that we know that the machines work very well, and we've seen evidence of that time and time again. However, if you're a voter and you go up to the machine and you put it in and the American flag appears, it says you voted, understandably, I don't know that that counted it correctly. I think it generally did. It generally plays out well that it did. But how do I know? So what this would have would be another feature that at the end, when you place the paper ballot in the scanner, it's going to have a screen that's going to come up. It's going to show your selections on the left. We got a demo of it. It's going to show your selections. You can scroll through and see them. There's going to be a big button that says cast your ballot that you can press. That'll cast the ballot. Or there's a button you can press that says reject ballot. So if there was an issue with your ballot before it casts it, you can press it. I know I've done that before, as when I was in DC. I remember one time I voted and I forgot there was a backside to the ballot. And in that moment, I would have loved a machine like this where I would have been able to say, oh, yep, I forgot that. I realized right as I saw that paper slip away into the machine, and I knew as an election official it was too late at that point. So the confirmation screen is a new option. So this kind of combines the best of the paper ballot process, which is something that I think is the best process because it has an audit trail to it. It allows voters. The trouble with the old DRE machines is you can only have voters go through as fast as you have machines. Paper ballots, you can add more voting booths if you have space. So from an efficiency standpoint, paper ballots are better. From a security standpoint, they're better. From an auditability standpoint, they're better. The thing they don't have that the DRE screens had was a final screen that it goes into. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. This equipment would be equipped with that. And one of the things that we had to do, we were figuring out this, was, okay, how many scanners are we going to need if we're going to implement this in a new feature? Because this is going to mean changes in how people go through the polling place. Right now, voters come in, they check in, they go to a voting booth. Usually there's one scanner. At busy sites we have two. They put it in, they move through, scanning your ballot takes about 15 seconds and then you're done. Well, this might take 15 seconds for some voters that are just going to go, yep, I know what I put. It's good. There might be other voters that sit there for a minute and review it. There might be a voter that discovers they made an error and they want their ballot back and they want to go correct it. So we had to increase the overall number of pieces of equipment that we had. The downside to this will be if we have more precincts with two scanners, that we know when we have two scanners, we're making officers do math after a long day, and there's more, the risk of an officer reporting incorrect information from a precinct at the end of the day is geometrically increased when you add in math rather than just reporting the simple numbers. And we've seen that play out in previous elections. So that will be a challenge in terms of training. But I think that it's a really great feature. And we think we'll probably be the first or one of the first counties in Virginia, assuming the supervisors approve this. So for those of you who are a fan of this feature, feel free to email your county supervisors and let them know how important this budget item is. So that is a great feature. So I end with that today in my report. And happy to answer any questions you all have or anything you want to dive into deeper.
Anything?
No questions. Very, very thorough.
Okay.
All right, so the next item of business is election certification. So earlier, I guess it was this week, two electoral board members in Waynesboro filed a lawsuit challenging and basically stating publicly they were refusing to certify the results in their county because of their concerns about not being able to have a hand count and their concerns about privacy. The lawsuit outlines all of their concerns about their issues with the way that the code requires votes to be counted. And this is the first time that we've seen this in Virginia. We've seen other states where local electoral board members have either taken it upon themselves to decide, I'm not going to certify the results, or been pressured by their political party or someone else to say, okay, for whatever reason, I refuse to certify the results for my county for this election. And that obviously leads to lawsuits, delays, all sorts of potential issues down the road if electoral board members refuse to do the job that we were appointed to do. So as a result of this, we communicated, and Eric drafted a statement, and so I'm going to read the statement that the three of us unanimously agreed on in terms of our responsibility for conducting elections in Prince William County. The Prince William County Electoral Board seeks to assure its citizens they stand ready to thoroughly review and certify results after the election, overseeing a voting process that is accurate, fair, and transparent. Polling places utilize ballot scanners that are certified by the State Department of Elections and thoroughly tested before each election. Prior to this election, ballot scanners were tested with more than 10,000 ballots in a process overseen by electoral board members, the general registrar, and observers. After this election, a statewide audit will be performed to verify the results, a process the public is welcome to observe and which the board will oversee. PWC continues to be one of the few counties in the nation to post all results tapes online for full transparency. Governor Glenn Youngkin stated in a recent executive order that the Virginia model for securing elections has proven itself over the past few years. As board members appointed by different parties, we may disagree in our politics, but we agree Virginia has a proven voting process, and we cooperate in a bipartisan way to make sure elections are fair and accurate. At the direction of a unanimous board, the Office of Elections has feverishly recruited election officers the last 2 years to ensure that polling places are well-staffed with equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats. The board has unanimously supported the expansion of evening and Sunday voting that served more than 4,000 voters this past Sunday. The board has asked our general registrar to review topics of concern surrounding election integrity and security on repeated occasions, only to find time and again that the process is working. We have tremendous confidence in the integrity and competence of our general registrar, the Office of Election staff, and the 1,000 plus bipartisan election officers who execute this election. They are not only painstaking in their work, but they are creating models for election transparency. We observe every aspect of their work in carrying out our electoral board duties. As a board, our focus is to ensure the orderly operation of elections, not attempting to change the law and honor vested in the officials elected by the process we oversee. Our good faith in that process and dutiful compliance with the law ensures a fair and accurate process for all our voters and is essential for the preservation of our republic. The PWC Electoral Board will make sure Virginia's laws are upheld for our voters, verify accurate results are reported, and certify those results in a public process after a thorough review. We encourage all citizens to vote with pride and confidence in this historic election. Again, this was a statement unanimously agreed to by all three board members that for Prince William County, we are committed to following the law and following our duties and following the oath that we all have taken. So the next issue, I guess, is provisional voting.
Now let's get into some stuff you guys disagree about. Okay, so this was just a follow-up to you all had wanted to talk about how you handle situations where the officer hasn't checked the identification box. I have a visual of it here. Can you guys see that okay? I think after a previous election, the election officer is supposed to check whether the voter showed ID or completed the ID confirmation statement. There's a yes or a no there, and there's not really a lack of clarity on your guys' part when yes is checked or no is checked, but when the officer forgets to check that, what is the point of action? And that you guys, at that time, it was just Keith and London that were on the board, and they had a disagreement about it, and they called me in, and I was like, well, I don't get a vote in this. So you have 3 members now, but I know we had talked about after that maybe this would be a good item for a board discussion, because then we can let our officers know what your guys, I mean, ideally they should be checking the box one way or the other, but I know from seeing provisional envelopes over the years that, there's a lot happening, officers make mistakes, and sometimes they forget it, so it's something that we will remind our chiefs about. I have a final meeting with the chiefs, and I am going to remind them of this, but it probably would be good to kind of preemptively know what your guys' plan is for this, so I can pass that along to the chiefs.
Okay. Do you want me to?
Well,
Go ahead.
I believe that our training is perfect and that our officers are perfect in their execution of their duties. I believe that there is a business presumption of regularity which has to be overcome. And if there is no valid reason to overcome the presumption, then if they fail to check the box, then I would vote that the ballot not be accepted.
Okay, so yeah, this situation happened last November, and so what the example up here, the voter, this is a same-day registration, I believe, and so the voter did everything correct on her part, and the officer signed it where the officer was supposed to sign it. The only thing that was missing was they didn't check the box, yes or no, saying, I checked the ID of the voter. And so over the years, with different electoral board members, and this is a, it's a personal thing with during every election. My argument has been, if the voter doesn't check a box, if the voter doesn't sign the envelope, then that is legitimately a case to not count that provisional ballot, because the voter has to take responsibility for everything that she is required to do to fill out this application to make sure that her provisional ballot is counted. However, if the thing that's missing on the envelope is a checkbox from the chief, I don't think it's fair to penalize the voter for a mistake that the election officer has made, and we have no idea. I mean, it was, in all these situations we faced, it was signed. The election officer had signed it. The thing that was missing was checking the box, yes, saying I checked the ID. And while we may hope that there's a presumption that every election officer will do everything perfectly in every election, we all know that human beings make mistakes in checking someone in filling out applications. Human beings make mistakes. And my feeling is that we shouldn't penalize the voter for a mistake like this that's made by the chief, who is trained but has not completed his or her responsibilities completely. So that was the disagreement that we had, and so we're gonna put Marcus on the spot. His very first meeting, he's the tiebreaker. So, I mean, so this is just one example of when we're doing provisional ballots, there are all sorts of reasons why someone gets a provisional ballot. And the easy ones are, well, I requested a mail ballot, but I didn't send it back, but I came in to vote on election day. And so all of those, if they haven't sent the absentee ballot back, we count those. Those are the easy ones. And then there are people who they're driving home and it's 6:45 and they know they can't make it to their home precinct, but they want to vote. So they drive into that local precinct and the officer is trained to say, your best chance of having your vote counted is if you vote at your home precinct. But if the voter demands a provisional ballot, our training, I believe, is give the voter that provisional ballot. And it's up to the electoral board, not the chief or any officers, to decide whether, well, that's an easy one because the law says you can only vote in the precinct where you live. And that's the same thing for same-day registration. If someone comes in that they've missed the close of books, the cutoff for registering to vote, they can't go into any precinct that's in their neighborhood and say, well, I want to do a same-day registration. They have to provide identification that shows that they live in that precinct where they're seeking to register. So there are all sorts of situations that we face when we're doing provisional ballots, and this is just one example of, I mean, it's a personal call for what we decide to do. There's no clear right answer where it's a lack of a box that the chief didn't check. So that's sort of the range of provisional ballot issues that we face, and because it's a presidential year, we expect a large number of SDRs and just regular provisionals. So I guess Eric is teeing this up as a way to at least get one of these issues off the table before we do provisional ballots.
Well, you all had talked about that.
Right.
About trying to do it just so that we could make sure that the officers knew, because if they know that not checking that might invalidate someone's vote, then I mean, it's a point of emphasis either way for us, but it helps clarify it. But as I told you guys that day, I have no vote, and you both make a compelling argument.
So we decide this here?
Sure.
No?
Do you have
I have a question first.
Okay.
Does the voter get to see this form in its completion with that box checked or not checked before the ballot is cast?
Voter sees the form, but the bottom is for office use only, so they might not read that. It depends on the officer, probably. Probably some officers would show the voter that, some of them might not, just complete the process as planned. So
Then I would offer that needs to be part of the officer training. The voters should see this fully completed by both the voter himself and the officer before that ballot is cast.
Okay.
And while I think the situation that Keith describes is possible, if not even probable, with people finding themselves in the 11th hour trying to get their vote counted before the window closes. However, I would also refer back to the statement that was made: if the voter has done everything right, I would offer that when we find ourselves in these situations, I would say a number of things has already gone wrong, given all of the opportunities that have been given in early voting and mail-in voting and absentee voting, multiple sites, multiple days, multiple opportunities that voter has not taken advantage of. And I'll hearken back to my background as a pilot. Checklists, things have to be done, and those checklists are there for a reason. And in the world of aviation, it's for safety of the pilot and the passengers. And it's to ensure that a process is followed, a vetted process that needs to be followed every time. And if that process is not followed, then bad things can happen. And I think to a degree, that applies with elections as well. There's a process, there's opportunity, there's multiple eyes, and if, in spite of all of that, a process is not followed as it should be, then I would say the vote does not count.
Here, here.
can definitely add that to the procedure and make that a point of emphasis to the chiefs in that final meeting. And also just a reminder to them that, one of the things we try to remind them of is, to make sure as the day starts, especially as officers are doing their first provisional ballot, the chiefs are often doing that, but sometimes they have assistance with it. if you have an assistant chief or an EPS that's doing your provisional ballot, or if you have voters that are checking in voters for the first time, making sure to be, watching over their shoulder, checking their work, making sure they're doing it properly. You get started off on that right foot, and then everything else should, flow from there. So we'll add that to the that final meeting. We're doing, just so people know too, the chiefs are they have a number of elements of the training they have to do. We've added one for this election, which is a meeting with me and a couple other staff about, I think it's a week before the election or so, just because we know that especially in presidential years, things arise. We want to make sure to pass along something like this. Hey, I have a directive from the board that I need you all to follow and remind your officers about. We make the manual, I don't know, we have to make it a couple months before the election so we can print it and have it ready for the classes. But issues arise, things become in the news. Some of these are just practical matters. Hey, how to deal with, how to de-escalate a situation. Just things like that. Some of the soft stuff that's not necessarily procedures, but so anyway, we're doing that meeting this election. I think it's going to be a good thing, and we'll add this to the agenda. So
Okay. And so everyone understands when the board decides not to count a provisional ballot, there's a letter sent to the voter saying your ballot was not counted for this reason. And that letter will say your ballot was not counted because the chief election officer didn't sign it or didn't check the box. So it's an additional emphasis for the election officers, hopefully, to know that while we're not going to name them, we're not going to name and shame them. We are going to tell voters, sorry, your vote wasn't counted because the election officers made a mistake. So that's the process.
One saved round on this issue, if I'm making. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. One saved round on this question. During the process of us looking at the provisional ballots, if I read the handbook and the code correctly, there's an opportunity for voters to come in and make their case, correct? And so this would be one of those cases. If you can bring your ID and show us that you are this person, then this ballot will count.
yeah, you'll have a hearing the day after the election at noon. Voters can come, and I think the last federal election we had about 4 or 5. We usually get 1 or 2, but at federal elections we might get 4 or 5 or 6. You might have more for this election, but yeah, they might come in and try to correct some of those situations. The only thing in this instance would be that if the voter didn't know there was an issue, then they wouldn't know they needed to do that. So I think adding this step to the procedure of the officer saying, I want you to verify that I've signed this form and that I have confirmed that you have, shown me your identification or not, and then explaining them what they need to do is a good, it's a good step of verification.
My feeling is that adding those 2 steps, at that point, your office and the board has gone above and beyond to provide every opportunity. That's my opinion.
Okay. All right. Well, we have come to the point in the agenda for public comments. We have 4 individuals who have signed up. So public comments are 3 minutes per person. And so let me...
Just a warning, if you all coming up, the stability on this thing is not great, so don't lean into it.
Can I see that sheet? No, look, something.
Oh. Does that help it work?
Yeah. All right, good.
This room's a little far away from home, but I get used to these chairs.
Are we ready? Okay, so I apologize, Philip, I can't read the last name. Oh, okay. All right, so the next person is Kim Rosine.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kim Rosine. So I want to talk a little bit about the absentee ballots and the early voting, I think, and that the most secure way to cast an absentee ballot is at the ballot box in the early voting precincts, and to use the ballot tracks that PWC has. Many of the Republican voters are concerned with the security of our ballots, especially if they go through the post office. There's been a lot of issues with the post office, losing ballots, holding ballots, and Commissioner Beals says that people have lived in an address for a long time and then their ballot doesn't get to them because all of a sudden their address is undeliverable. For some bizarre reason, that's happened. It's not reaching them. So we've also heard stories of mail sitting in the processing centers for an extensive amount of time, so their ballots aren't getting to them in time for them to mail back in time. So it's best if you do have a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, you take it to your the main registrar office or wherever you're allowed to turn it in by hand in person. And then I had one other thought as you all were talking, that I totally agree that as citizens of the U.S., we have a unique privilege and duty to vote. However, I disagree with the premise that voting should be easy and cheating hard. I believe that voting should be hard, and that makes cheating harder. And when I say hard or difficult, I mean it's a huge responsibility, and so it should be something that we weigh heavily on us, because it's a massive, massive privilege, and it's not one that every country gets. And so if you believe that privilege and duty comes heavy responsibility. So voting shouldn't be willy-nilly or drive-by or, just something that you do like ordering your Amazon, okay? Because that doesn't take a lot of thought. It doesn't take a lot of effort. And with effort, you realize what you're doing, and you realize maybe the great responsibility and privilege that we have. And so when you make it too easy, it becomes not as relevant. That's what I believe. So I believe that we should have an election day, not a season. A day means that there is a limited amount of time, and that you do have a massive responsibility to make the effort and the time to get out there and do your duty, your civic duty, and your unique privilege. So that's my thoughts on that. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Next is Norma McAllister.
First off, I'm really nervous, so I've never done this before. I don't have a lot of faith in the voting. One of the reasons is because I had my mail-in for the first time. Well, actually, this is our second time for mail-in. Before, we always went in to vote. And I was a little disturbed by the mail-in. I don't know if anybody's seen it. I'm kind of emotional about it because I was kind of shocked. And in the little corner, it says, check here if you don't have no Social Security. So I didn't understand that. It didn't make any sense. So I've been asking several people that had mail-in, and they're like, I didn't see that. I don't understand. I'm like, I took a picture of it. I said, see, it says check here if you don't have a Social Security number. Well, to me, I was like, it didn't make any sense. But after listening to you, Mr. Olson, about the DMV, I'm thinking to myself, is the database not being connected? Because when you're registering to vote, you have to have all this documentation. But when you go to the DMV, it looks like all you have to do is check and you can go vote. Something's wrong. There's something wrong with the system. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. And where's the responsibilities of the DMV? I mean, and how come they don't communicate? How come the databases don't look at each other? It doesn't make any sense. But if you look, have you looked at the mail-in ballot? Has anybody looked at that? I'm just curious, and I'm thinking there's something wrong with this system. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just nervous. Thank you.
What was your name again,
Norma
Colleen?
McAllister,
Wow,
and I lived in the county for 28 years. So, anyway, sorry.
thank you, Norman. You
Great,
did great.
thank you.
I meant to say a lot more.
All right, and final name is, I can't make this out. What's that?
That's Colonel Jeff Fuller. 3 Purple Heart winner.
Sorry for the scribbling. You get old enough, you can't even read your own
He's
handwriting.
got enough shrapnel in him, he can't walk through a metal detector without setting it off, so he's excused for having chicken scratch.
Well, that was an interesting board meeting, and I think you guys covered a lot of ground, a lot of it welcome, and so I'm grateful for that. In the last meeting, I brought up a list of names, and I mentioned, Eric, that I'd looked at the 42 names, and I did some cross-checking and so forth, and you expressed concern about the fact that I might be in violation of Virginia code. I get that data from GOP database. I'm an authorized user of that database, and as you know, the parties are allowed to buy that data from the state. I got the other data that I cross-referenced from Eric, the outfit that does that work for election integrity. And they made me sign a statement of to protect the data, as you would expect. So I don't let that data go willy-nilly around. And I don't think I'm in violation of the law. So I just wanted to make that statement. I would ask, when deliberating on these matters, you mentioned the balance between transparency and security, and I appreciate that. I think you got to weigh heavy on the transparency question, because that's what generates a lot of these conspiracy theories and who could have done what to who and so forth. My issue, as you know, recently has been the fact that we have transparency all the way through the process of the absentee ballot, except from the time it hits the general registrar's office until Eric takes it into the pre-processing stage, where we have election officers doing the work, we have authorized representatives of the parties watching. And we have to trust, and I do trust Eric and his staff. I have no complaints about them. But the reason we have a system in Virginia where you have parties looking at this process for a reason. It isn't, and the fact that the board looks at it is fine, but it doesn't calm me down when I think about the role of the parties in making sure all this stuff is copacetic. So I would ask only that you try to figure out a way, I'm not going to do it, that you can get visibility of the parties through the election officers and or their authorized representatives, or both, like you do for pre-processing, in the curing and handling and review of ballots in the general registrar's office. I like the fact that we've got ballot tracks. That's very useful. And I also would just add, as a chief election officer in 2023, I made a mistake on a provisional ballot form. And I was called, and I had to race in to sign it so that voter would get his ballot cast. It happens, no question about it. I do think that we need to take advantage of Marcus's point about checklists and job aids and all that sort of thing, which you guys have done a great job on. But, if it's important, you got a checklist and you follow it. I want to mention it. In Virginia, the Virginia legislature and the governor signed a budget that prevents Virginia from doing an audit of the presidential election, the most important election in our lifetime, and we're not going to be able to do an audit of that election because the legislature said no money can be spent on audit of the presidential election. Why? Why? Very irritating. And then the State Board of Elections says you won't do it on you won't do any kind of batch comparison audit of the Senate race. Why? The batch comparison audit is the only chance to confirm what Eric already told us, is that the machine accurately reads the intent of the voter precisely, and it's all reflected in the results. So it's good to have that, and Eric, I really am grateful for that information you gave us because it builds confidence, right? It happens over and over, and you're always right. That builds confidence. But to have the legislature tell us and the governor to agree that we're not going to be able to audit the presidential election, is totally stunning and unacceptable. So thank you guys for what you're doing. It's astonishing to me that we are able to pull off an election like this. Every time it happens, I always have my teeth kind of gritted, but I appreciate what you're doing. And Eric, thank you and your staff. By the way, I call into your staff. I'm one of those guys that calls in and asks for stuff, asks questions. And whoever it is that's answering that phone deserves a star for congeniality, professionalism, and just putting the right face on the whole office. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, do we have anyone else that wants to make public comment that didn't get a chance to sign in? Yes.
Would you like me to sign in?
Sure. Great. Okay, so please identify yourself and
Sure.
go ahead.
I'm Steve Amato. I'm a resident of the Occoquan District here in Prince William County. I'm both a trained elections officer and a poll watcher. I recognize a few election officers in here that I've worked with during early voting this year, so glad to see you all again in a different capacity. First, I want to state to Mr. Olson, the open house that was hosted by your office in August was awesome. I learned and saw the practical application from going through online training to be an election officer to actually seeing it in person with your staff and going over the processes. Your in-depth presentation about the certification helped build and instill confidence in me within how our county is running the elections. So thanks for that. I commend your staff, many of them working overtime for that, and I hope that the county can compensate them for further open houses in the future. It's extremely beneficial for everybody to do that. Maybe a few more days to have that. Looking back on the presentation, a lot of great information, and I just throw out there as a follower of checklists for many years in the military that on the provisional ballot, are we providing feedback to those chief officers of election at the precincts if they are not signing, if there's different breakdowns, but getting that feedback is important because without that feedback, we can't bolster how we can continue with our elections to do that. And as a 27 plus years, I cast many ballots by absentee, and I do think it's a personal responsibility of everybody who does an absentee ballot to get it in on time, sign it, and document it. There should be no excuse, nothing at all for that, unless there's a medical issue which would preclude that individual from getting that ballot in. I do want to highlight feedback again for the Office of Elections. Again, as a poll watcher, I've seen many times where the voters are almost voting and having a little conversation in the voting booth. There have been election officers who've been very positive and assertive to go up to those voters and say, do you need an assistance form here? And if not, that election officer has said, stop talking, this isn't a discussion on that. And other times, I've had to inform the chief about that, which the chief, again, a very positive, assertive to those voters, nothing disrespectful, but quite a bit of observation on that, which I think is significant, where maybe Mr. Olson, you could just push that out in notes, whatever, to all the chiefs to be cognizant of. And one last thing I have not read or seen anything in the past. But maybe after the election and we have a push of transparency, if there can be a simple statement that would really help the citizens of the county understand that what we do here is extremely important, but in a lot of compliance, which is commendable. But just have a simple statement. We had X number of ballots totally cast, voted in Prince William County. We have X number of registered Prince William County voters. If one is greater than the other, hopefully we don't have more that are cast votes that are greater than registered, then we do have a problem. But hopefully it's the other way around. I think that would really help with all of our citizens. Look at the confidence that we have in our board. That's all. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
I was just gonna, just generalized comment, not to, I took notes on everything you guys, I always do at all the meetings, but, just a note, if you have a question about the voting process, like a couple of those were raised, please call our office, we're happy to help out and answer questions, explain to you why something looks like it does in the form, explain to you what that process is. Our office is happy to do that, we do that all day long for hundreds of voters, and we're happy to do that. We do, as somebody mentioned, the resources, we do have resources online, and getting people to know and understand this process is something that's hard, and we encourage you to get people to look out to that information, because it's very easy just to take something that's cynical and something that spreads a rumor and just spread that around to other people. The more responsible things as citizens that we have to do is we have to make sure that we know and understand how the process works. And there are always things to improve in the process. You know, I've never worked for an organization that didn't have lots of things it could improve upon. So we need to be responsible in how we do that. And then just to encourage you all, Canvas, our schedule for the post-election process is online. Canvas is open to the public, certification is open to the public. You can come in, you can see the officer teams that are reviewing the results, you can see how that process works. The board's there, I'm there, officers are there, you know, that's all open to the public for people to come see. So we do try to be as transparent as we can, and there are opportunities for people to learn things and participate. So we encourage everybody to do so.
One thing I want to say, I have a question. When I took my ballot and dropped it off, I asked them, what does this mean on the bottom? Check here, blah, blah, blah. So I went to 3 people, they didn't have an answer.
Talking about the election officers,
Yeah.
they might not know
That's
that
fine,
about the mail
that's
voting.
fine.
I can talk to you after the meeting though if you want.
No, but real quick, what
Yeah.
happened is the lady came to me and I asked her, and she said it was a disclosure.
Okay.
Because this is something they just started this year, to have that box of
Okay.
just to throw it out there. Where's the certification?
Our post-election activities generally happen at the old courthouse.
Everyone.
Yeah, they're all either there or at our office, which is right next door. So,
And that schedule is posted on our
yeah,
website.
public schedule for that is all posted online. There are parts of that vary. Sometimes Canvas takes 1 day, sometimes it takes 2, but that is all available there. So,
All right. Do we
Mr.
need-
Chairman, I
we need,
move that the election board go into closed session pursuant to Virginia State Code, Section 2.2-3711-A7 for the purpose of discussing pending litigation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you all very much. We'll see you after Election Day.